A couple of videos back, I got some very rare pushback in my comfortable echo chamber. It was probably deserved, as I kind of wandered off the point, leaving it unresolved and, it has to be admitted, scarcely examined. Sometimes I have shied away from this subject, partly because it is such a hot topic, but mostly because it is so difficult to unravel. And that is the topic of Englishness. But it seems this topic must be tackled, even if, as I suspect, I will come to no resolution that will be satisfactory, not only to you, my dear subscribers, but also not to me. As I mentioned at the start of my first video on the horror of the grooming gangs, almost 9 years ago now, I have never been a racist, not only because I thought it was unkind, and this was when I was in early primary school, but also because even at the tender age of 6 or 7, it didn't seem to make much sense. Even a very young child could tell that you couldn't tell someone's character just by looking at them and their external traits. Of course, I didn't intellectualize it then, but it was a raw, even a pure emotion, unaffected by the views of societies. And that stance has never left me. The stereotype of the old-fashioned racist, whatever that might be, was unattractive to me, and I've always recoiled from it. And I've always thought that that was one thing I would never have to reconsider, so secure was I in my beliefs. But I was wrong. Not because I have changed my mind and I'm now an ethno-nationalist, because I'm nothing of the kind. But I am having to, as I say, reconsider my position. And one of the main parts of that reconsideration is that I am now listening to people who I would never have deigned to accommodate in my previous life. I now listen to and often respect the opinions of ethno-nationalists, the people that I too used to call racists, or rather I dismissed as racists. So am I a racist now? Well, even like almost everybody else on the dissident side, I hesitate to say the dissident right. I'm a lot less afraid of the slur than I used to be. But no, I'm not a racist, nor even an ethno-nationalist, but I am considering the now undeniable racial element to the English question. And I repeat, I am considering the ethno-nationalist position, not agreeing with it. As I understand it, ethno-nationalists believe that only people who look English, mostly by being white, can ever be English. I understand that impulse, I really do. But I don't think it's necessarily a natural one, but one that has emerged as a consequence of 30 years of essentially open borders. In my opinion, it has emerged as a defence mechanism to counter the demonstrable prejudice against white people. Essentially, the vibe is, you just can't trust black people, and the safest position is to be racist. Many will argue that racism, or in-group preference, is natural. And on one level, they're right. It is a natural defence trait in tribal societies. When one has no deeper information on strangers, one defaults to one's intuition, one's prejudice, if you like. It's the safe position. But when I say I'm not convinced that it is a completely natural impulse, I think of my 6-year-old Chinese friend David, who I was at primary school with. I wasn't conditioned to like or dislike him. In fact, if anything, I could have joined in with his bullying, but I didn't. I don't know why I didn't, other than that I didn't think his bullying was deserved. I believe my impulse was genuine instinct, as opposed to any kind of conditioning, since I was far too young to be conditioned either way, one way or the other. So was my young Chinese friend English? Well, probably not. In fact, as I was 6, I don't even know for a fact that he was Chinese. He could have been Japanese or Korean or Cambodian. That's the point here. At 6 years old, Even though he was obviously physically different to me, that was just a detail, and a minor one at that. Racism and prejudice is taught, sometimes for good reason, and sometimes not. In a vaguely patronising and supremacist way, during the Empire days, white British children were taught that they were superior to the non-white children of the Empire. It's true. But what's also true is that British children were also taught that they were superior to other white Europeans. Palestinian children in Gaza are taught to believe that Jewish children are pigs, and some Israeli children are taught by their parents to return the favour. And now in the West, and particularly in the big bad imperial villain of history, the United Kingdom, white children are taught, and not at all vaguely, that they possess an original sin of having been born white. Not only is this being made complicated, but it is also insidious and actually downright evil. It's so evil that I find it scarcely believable that people would deliberately fill their children's open and innocent minds with this kind of poison. But sadly they do. Now this is entirely different to filling their children's heads with pride in who they are, where they come from, and the kind of country that their parents and grandparents have built, and that they, in time, will inherit. That is different. In fact, it's all the difference in the world. This is how you build a child's confidence. In their formative years, we praise our children for doing even the most basic things, not because they are impressive in themselves, because when compared to a genius like Beethoven, who was writing symphonies at 3 years old, it's pretty small beer by comparison. But that's not the point. The point is that confidence builds confidence. It's basically how one builds a civilized and capable human being. Instilling pride is not merely the opposite of instilling shame. Instilling pride is constructive. Instilling shame is what one shouldn't do. Instilling shame is not only destructive, it is an especially egregious form of child abuse. Instilling pride is not, as the progressive leftists would have it, indoctrination, but teaching shame where none exists, as it never does in children, very definitely is indoctrination. And so this is where we are, and where we have been since we took our collective eyes off the ball and allowed the teaching profession to abuse our children. As Malcolm X once famously said, only a fool would let his enemies educate his children. And we have been fools for at least 2 whole generations. And now, predictably, we have the devil's own job of turning this around. The fact that we are now having such incoherent and tortuous discussions about what it means to be English is proof of this. The fact that an increasing number of young people are rejecting their programming and are embracing pride in patriotism is a genuine credit to them and gives genuine hope for the future. I suppose we can thank the internet for much of that. But the leftists are moving things up a notch, despite being told that I'm being radicalised by the algorithms. In the past month, my timeline is packed full of the most deranged shitlibs. It was never like this before. But this is a source not of despair, but one of optimism. They are losing the argument, one post at a time. They continue to insist that the English are not a racial group, not an ethnicity, and despite England being one of the very oldest political entities on earth, having clocked up at least 1150 years so far, the English do not actually exist. Now this is obviously utter horseshit of the highest order, and it's also obviously a tactic. They know it's not true, but because it's not easy to define nor to pin down, they leverage that kernel of doubt in the minds of even the most fervent English nationalists into the ridiculous claim that the English do not exist. But there is doubt there. How could there not be? in a country over 1,000 years old as a political entity, and far older than that, as far as demographics are concerned, and one that has, for good or ill, managed to spread itself all over the entire globe. Of course the edges are going to be blurry. Intermarriage, miscegenation, invasions, rape and pillage, and colonialist expansion will very definitely blur the edges of the ethnic base. It is an inevitability. But because it is an inevitability, that very fact will be seized upon by those who have pushed the desirability of every nationality and ethnic group over the English, and now fear the inevitable consequence of the English somewhat belatedly coalescing around their ethnic identity. English ethnicity must therefore be denied at every turn. Their fear is well founded, and their desperation should be viewed in this context. They're losing, and they know it. So, having established that they are losing, we should examine our own attitudes to this subject. When we are faced with such a diabolical attack on our very identity, it is natural, and not to say perhaps sensible, to go down the ethno-nationalist path. Many of the people attacking us are from ethnic non-white groups. The media and academia are awash with these types. Krishnan, Guru Murphy, Michelle Hussain, Afua Hirsch, David Olusango, Kehinde Andrews, the self-identified comedian Nish Kumar, disappointingly Lenny Henry, and my personal favourite Yasmin Alibi Brown. If ever there was a person for whom hate-filled fitted exactly, it is her. But as putrid as that lot really are, they are not the main villains. No, the biggest are homegrown, always white, upper middle class, and especially white upper middle class women. And there are too many to list. These people are essentially traitors who genuinely believe that that treachery has been concealed by a carapace of compassion. It hasn't. We can all see right through it. What's more difficult to see is their motivation. But whatever their motivation, they are extremists. They call those of us who wave our flags and call for mass deportations extremists, but do not smear those who wave the flags of Palestine, and somewhat more importantly, those who have kept the borders open and explicitly against the wishes of the great majority of the population. Somehow this extreme action becomes unextreme if it goes on for decades, and in the modern parlance, this is gaslighting in extremis, so to speak. But is it extreme to deny the status of Englishness to anyone who isn't genetically white? My feeling is that it is, partly because how many generations must we go back to establish the necessary English genetics? 2, 4, 50? If we go back that far, almost none of us will qualify. I've no idea how far my genetics go back. If I can't prove 50 generations, am I not English? I'm sympathetic to the ethnic pushback, and this pushback is necessary. It's necessary because the other extreme has been rammed down our throats, that of the idea that second-generation immigrants, foreign-born naturalised citizens, and even those who washed up on the beach yesterday are just as English as you and me. This idea is even more dishonest than that you can't be English unless you can prove lineage lasting 50 generations. And this conversation, being so difficult to pin down, has instead begun to disappear up its own arse. There is no clear answer to this, and yet commentators on both sides of the discussion continue to stab it with their steely knives, but they just can't kill the beast. So is being English an ethnicity? Largely yes, but not wholly. If we're being reasonable, there are endless exceptions and caveats. This is not a spreadsheet, and nor is it a mathematical equation. Many are promoting the classic British fudge of invoking Britishness as a futile attempt to inject some clarity into this. They suggest that non-white people can be British, but not English. On the face of it, this sounds like a useful shortcut, not least because of people like me, who believe themselves to be chiefly British, with English as a secondary identity. This take is, I suspect, promoted by those who primarily see themselves as English first, with Britishness as a second-tier consolation prize that they are content to allow newcomers to acquire. But as I say, this is an illogical fudge, made only possible by the unique way in which the United Kingdom is constituted. Using this as a solution to the debate necessarily means that neither Germans, nor Swedes, nor the French can do the same. My feeling is that, whilst ethnicity is important, what is more important is not the vacuous idea of British values, idiotically topped by the meaningless notion of tolerance, but by behaviour. And behaviour doesn't have to mean drinking tea, apologising to people who bump into you, queuing, chatting about the weather, drinking heavily at every possible opportunity, or wearing a velvet jacket and a cravat whilst riding a horse through a tempest like those unhinged characters on your screen. Although that does help. By behaviour, I mean mostly the absence of poor behaviour. And behaviour means not sponging off the state the moment you arrive. It means going into a shop and paying for the things in the shop. It means not walking around with a deadly weapon, concealed or otherwise. It means not following single women around and making lewd and suggestive remarks to them, especially when they are trying to ignore you. It means not loitering in parks and outside schools and doing the same thing to schoolgirls. It means familiarising yourself with the rules and customs of the host country, such as saying please and thank you, and not having sex with a woman when she says stop, screams, or tries to fight you off. It doesn't have to mean that one must jettison one's Muslim faith, to use one example, but it does mean that if one is a Muslim, one should be mindful of how your faith might impact others who may not share it. No demands for separate prayer rooms, no blasting the call to prayer at 4 a.m, no head-to-foot coverings for women, no ostentatious wearing of ethnic and religious garb in every situation, no blocking roads and pavements to pray, no calling for the killing of Jewish mothers and the raping of their daughters, and no calling all your extended male relatives so that you can gang sodomise a white 12-year-old girl in a derelict house. You know, that kind of thing. The civic nationalists believe that you become British or English simply by deciding to identify as British or English, rather than by actually doing any work to make yourself accepted. And the ethno-nationalists believe that you can never become English unless your ancestors stretch all the way back to the Battle of Naseby. Judging people's Englishness by their behaviour seems like child's play by comparison. Likewise, with all this talk of mass deportations, this judging of behaviour can also be formulated to decide who gets deported and who doesn't. I've reluctantly come to accept one of the ethnats' tenets, that a country probably should be 95% ethnically homogeneous. Any more than that, as we have seen, and there are going to be problems. As far as I'm concerned, this is beyond argument. But at the same time, there are many people of ethnic heritage in Britain who not only behave impeccably, but actually go above and beyond what is expected of a normal patriotic citizen. It would be deeply unfair to target them, as if they really were the same as many of the unassimilated savages that have come over in their millions in the last couple of decades. Because of the vast numbers, there is of course a massive overlap in the Venn diagram of people who are not white and people who hate Britain, or are at least utterly indifferent to it. And also, because of those vast numbers, those well-behaved ethnic minorities are now massively outnumbered by those poorly behaved newcomers who just happen to look like them. So I understand the impulse of the ethno-nationalists to go for the obvious and line up ethnically. And I equally have sympathy for the idea of the civic nationalists that anybody can achieve a kind of Englishness if their heart is in the right place. Ethnicity cannot be ignored, but behaviour is the key metric, and it's not difficult to separate the good behaviour from the bad. But this is not a conclusion, and it's hardly satisfactory to me, so I'm sure it won't be to many of you. But this is me just trying to work through this stuff. I'm sure you'll tell me what you think.